The alarms on Larkspur Station started screaming before I even opened my eyes. I rolled off my bunk, my boots hitting the cold floor, and I already knew this was not a drill. 3 ships had entered orbit above our colony, and none of them belonged to us. My name is Grace Ashworth, and I was 26 years old the day the sky changed. I worked communications on Larkspur, a modest mining and research outpost on the edge of what we called the Frontier Belt, 3 months' travel from Earth by fast courier. We were small, we were quiet, and until that morning, we were mostly forgotten. I ran to the control deck with my hair still tangled from sleep. Commander Louisa Fenwick was already there, standing at the main console, her arms folded, her face unreadable. Behind her, the view screen showed 3 long silver vessels hanging in the black, patient and still, like they had all the time in the galaxy and knew it. "They are not firing," Louisa said, before I could even ask. "They are asking to speak." That was the strange part. Nobody expected first contact to sound so polite. The voice that came through our speakers was smooth, almost gentle, translated a heartbeat after every alien syllable. They called themselves representatives of the Varanai Accord, a council of many worlds that had been watching human broadcasts for longer than any of us imagined. They said they came in peace. They said humanity had been selected for provisional membership in their union of civilizations. They said this was the greatest opportunity our species would ever receive. I remember the room going very quiet. Someone near me actually laughed, not from joy, but from the sheer impossible weight of the moment. We were not alone. We had never been alone. And now, apparently, we had been invited to a table we did not know existed. Louisa asked the only question that mattered. What did they want from us? The answer came smoothly, like it had been rehearsed 1,000 times before, for 1,000 other frightened little worlds. They wanted our weapons, not our ships, not our resources, not our land, just our weapons, all of them, every rifle, every cannon, every warhead, every blade forged for harm. They called it a gesture of trust. They said no civilization was permitted to join their union while still clinging to what they called primitive instruments of conflict. They said true peace required us to let go. I watched Louisa's jaw tighten, just slightly. She did not answer right away. Instead, she looked at me, and at Harold Nettleton beside me, and at every uncertain face in that room, as if searching for the right words in our expressions before she found them in her own mouth. "We will consider your proposal," she said finally, keeping her voice level. "Give us time." The screen went dark. The ships did not move. They simply waited, exactly like predators who already knew their prey had nowhere left to run. Within hours, the news had spread across every colony, every ship, every relay station humanity had ever built. Earth's central government responded within a single day, faster than I had ever seen any decision made. They agreed. Almost every major settlement agreed. The promise of joining a galaxy full of wonders, technology beyond our wildest dreams, medicine that could cure anything, ships that could cross the stars in days instead of years, it was simply too tempting to refuse. I understood the temptation. I truly did. We had spent our whole history staring up at the sky, wondering if we were alone, wondering if we would always be small and fragile and stuck. Now here was an answer, wrapped in a promise of belonging. But something about it sat wrong in my chest, like a splinter I could not quite reach. I had grown up on stories from my grandfather, a man who had served during the last great conflict on Earth, before peace finally settled across our homeworld. He used to tell me that safety is never given to you by someone else's hand. Real safety, he said, is something you build yourself and guard yourself, because anyone who offers to hold your protection for you can just as easily choose to let go of it when it suits them. I did not know yet how right he had been. 2 days after the ships arrived, disarmament teams began landing across the colonies that had already agreed to comply. I watched the broadcasts from other settlements. Tall alien figures moving through storage depots, collecting rifles, sealing away defense turrets, disabling planetary shield generators one by one. The people in those videos smiled. They shook hands with beings that did not have hands shaped quite like ours. They celebrated. Fireworks lit up more than one colony sky that night, and for a moment, it almost felt like the beginning of something wonderful. Larkspur Station had not yet given its answer. Commander Louisa Fenwick called a meeting of every senior staff member, myself included, even though I held no real rank beyond communications specialist. We gathered in the briefing room, 16 of us, crowded around a table meant for 10. The mood was tense, thick enough to touch. Central Command has ordered full compliance, Louisa said, sliding a datapad across the table. Every outpost, no exceptions. We surrender our defense systems within 72 hours. Nobody spoke for a long moment. Then Harold Nettleton, our chief engineer, a broad-shouldered man who had built half the turrets on our perimeter with his own 2 hands, finally broke the silence. With respect, Commander, has anyone actually asked why they want this so badly? A gift like this, dropped from the sky, no negotiation, no questions, just hand over every way you have to protect yourselves. Does that sound like trust to anyone else in this room? Louisa's eyes flicked toward the far end of the table, where an older man sat quietly, arms crossed, listening more than speaking, the way he always did. Edmund Faircliff. He was not technically part of Larkspur's command structure anymore. He had retired from active service years before I ever arrived, choosing instead to live at the edge of our settlement, tending a small workshop where he repaired old equipment and kept mostly to himself. But everyone on that station still called him Commander out of habit, and everyone still listened when he spoke. He had not said a single word since the meeting began. "Edmund," Louisa said carefully, "you have been quiet." He finally looked up, and I remember his eyes, pale gray, steady, the kind of eyes that had seen things the rest of us had only read about in old reports. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. "I have seen this before," he said. "Not exactly this, but the shape of it, and I will not be handing over anything." The room went cold in a way that had nothing to do with the station's environmental controls. Louisa leaned forward. "Edmund, this is not a request from the Council. It is an order from Earth's own government. If we refuse, we are not just defying aliens we barely understand. We are defying our own people. Then I will answer to our own people," he said. "But I will not disarm this colony, not while I still draw breath." I sat there, frozen, watching a man calmly declare that he intended to defy every government on Earth and an entire alien council at once, using nothing but the quiet certainty in his voice. Nobody in that room laughed. Nobody in that room argued either. Because somehow, in that moment, every single one of us understood that Edmund Faircliff was not speaking out of stubbornness, or fear, or pride. He was speaking like a man who already knew exactly what would happen if we listened to him, and exactly what would happen if we did not. I did not sleep that night. I lay awake in my bunk, staring at the ceiling, replaying his words over and over. I have seen this before. What could a retired station engineer possibly have seen, out here on the edge of nowhere, that made him willing to stand against the entire weight of human authority and an alien empire in the same breath? I decided right then that I needed to find out. The next morning, I walked to his workshop before my shift began, the cold air biting at my cheeks as the twin suns of our system rose pale over the ridgeline. His door was already open when I arrived, as if he had been expecting me. "You're up early, Miss Ashworth," he said, not turning from the console he was repairing. "I couldn't stop thinking about what you said." He finally looked at me then, and for the first time, I saw something behind his calm expression. Not fear exactly. Something closer to old grief, carried carefully, the way you carry something you have learned not to drop. "Sit down," he said. "If you want to understand why I won't disarm this station, you need to hear the whole story, and once you hear it, you will not be able to unhear it." I sat. Outside, beyond the reinforced glass of his workshop window, the 3 silver ships still hung in our sky, unmoving, patient, waiting for humanity to make its choice. I had no idea yet that the choice Edmund Faircliff was about to explain to me would decide whether our entire species survived what came next. Edmund poured 2 cups of dark, bitter tea from a battered kettle that looked older than the station itself. He set one in front of me, then lowered himself into the chair across the workbench, his joints creaking with the effort. "Before I tell you anything," he said, "I need you to understand something. What I know, I did not learn from rumors. I learned it firsthand, out past the edge of charted space, on a mission most people on this station were never told about. And when I brought that knowledge home, nobody wanted to hear it, so I stopped talking. Until now." I wrapped my hands around the warm cup, saying nothing, waiting. But before he could continue, the workshop door slid open without a knock. Harold Nettleton stood there, breathless, his uniform still half-fastened. "Commander Faircliff. Grace, you need to come to the landing field, right now." We did not ask why. Something in his voice told us the time for questions had already passed. The 3 of us hurried across the frozen ground toward Larkspur's main landing field, and as we came over the last rise, I saw them. A single alien shuttle had descended from one of the ships in orbit, sleek and silver, settling onto the packed Earth without a sound. Its ramp lowered slowly, releasing a faint hiss of pressurized air into the thin morning cold. 4 figures walked down that ramp. They were tall, taller than any of us, with long limbs and smooth gray skin that seemed to shift color slightly, depending on the angle of the light. Their eyes were large, dark, and strangely calm, set into faces that held no obvious hostility, no obvious threat. They wore simple metallic robes, unarmed as far as I could tell, though something about the way they moved suggested confidence, not caution. Confidence of beings who had never once needed to worry about the outcome of a disagreement. Commander Louisa Fenwick was already waiting for them, flanked by 2 of our own security officers, standing rigid and formal despite the fear I could see behind her eyes. The lead figure stepped forward. When it spoke, the translated voice carried the same smooth, patient tone we had heard through our speakers days before. "Greetings, representatives of Larkspur Station. We are pleased that Earth's Central Authority has accepted our terms. We are here to complete the process of disarmament, as agreed." Louisa's voice was steady, though I could hear the strain underneath it. "We understand the agreement made by Earth's central government. However, this station has not yet finalized its own compliance." The alien tilted its head slightly, a gesture that somehow conveyed mild confusion, or perhaps mild disappointment. "Delay is unnecessary. The process is simple. Your defense systems will be disabled, your weapons collected, and your station will be registered as compliant within the hour." That was when Edmund stepped forward, past Louisa, past the security officers, standing directly in front of the alien delegation, as if he were simply greeting an old neighbor. "There will be no disarmament here," he said. "Not today, not ever." For the first time since the shuttle had landed, something shifted in the alien's expression. Not anger, something closer to surprise, as if it had genuinely never expected to hear those particular words from a species so eager to please. "You speak for this entire station." "I speak for myself," Edmund said, "and I intend to make certain every soul on this station understands exactly what they are being asked to give away, before another single weapon leaves our hands." Louisa turned to him sharply. "Edmund, this is not the place." "It is exactly the place," he said, without raising his voice, without breaking his gaze from the alien in front of him. "Because they came here to take something from us, and I would like to know why they are in such a hurry to have it." The alien delegate studied him for a long moment. Then it spoke again, its tone unchanged, still smooth, still calm, still utterly certain of its own authority. "Your hesitation is noted. However, non-compliance carries consequences. Colonies who refuse disarmament will be excluded from the benefits of the accord. Trade routes will close. Medical assistance will be withheld. Your species will remain isolated, vulnerable, and alone." "We have been alone before," Edmund said. "We survived it." "You survived it," the alien replied, "because nothing came looking for you. That will not remain true forever." The words hung in the cold air between them, and I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. There was something in the way the alien said that sentence, something almost like a warning wrapped inside a threat, and I noticed Edmund's jaw tighten just slightly, as if he had caught the same thing I had. "Then let us keep the means to defend ourselves when that day comes," Edmund said. "That is precisely what we are here to prevent," the alien answered. "A species that keeps its weapons never truly learns to trust, and a species that does not trust cannot be permitted to remain within reach of the Accord's more vulnerable members. Surely you understand the logic." "I understand the logic," Edmund said quietly. "I simply do not believe it." The alien delegate turned to Louisa. "Commander, your colony's compliance was recorded as accepted by your planetary government. We were informed there would be no obstruction." Louisa hesitated, caught between the authority above her and the man beside her who had never once, in all the years I had known him, been wrong about anything that mattered. I watched her make her decision in real time, the way her shoulders straightened, the way her voice found its footing again. "There has been a miscommunication," she said carefully. "Larkspur Station requests additional time to review the terms before proceeding." The alien was silent for a long moment, its dark eyes moving slowly across each of our faces, as if calculating something none of us could see. Finally it spoke again. "Additional time will be granted. Once. 72 hours. After that, this station will be classified as non-compliant, and appropriate measures will follow." The four figures turned in unison and walked back up the ramp of their shuttle without another word. Moments later, the vessel lifted silently off the ground, climbing back toward the ships, waiting patiently in orbit, leaving behind nothing but disturbed dust and a silence so heavy it felt like a physical weight pressing down on all of us. Louisa turned to Edmund immediately, her voice sharp now, the fear finally breaking through the command she had held so carefully in front of the delegation. "Do you understand what you just did? You just bought us 72 hours and nothing more. After that, they will not ask again." "I know," Edmund said. "Then what exactly is your plan?" He looked at her, and then at me, and then at Harold standing beside us, and something in his expression told me he had been waiting for this exact moment for a very long time, perhaps longer than I had even known him. "My plan," he said, "is to tell you all the truth, every part of it, and then let every person on this station decide, with open eyes, whether they still want to hand over their ability to defend themselves." Louisa did not answer right away. I could see the war happening behind her eyes, the weight of her orders pressing against the weight of her instincts, and I realized in that moment that she trusted Edmund far more than she trusted the smooth promises of beings we had known for only a matter of days. "You have until tonight," she said finally. "Call every senior staff member together. If what you have to say is enough to justify defying our own government and an alien council at the same time, I want to hear every word of it myself." Edmund nodded slowly. "Tonight, then." As the crowd began to disperse, murmuring uneasily amongst themselves, I stayed close to him, my mind racing through everything I had just witnessed. The confidence of those aliens, so certain that no one would ever refuse them. The strange phrase that still echoed in my ears, "That will not remain true forever," spoken so calmly it almost sounded like comfort, when in truth it had sounded like nothing less than a quiet promise of danger still to come. I thought about my grandfather's words again, about safety never being something you could simply borrow from someone else's hands. I thought about the fireworks lighting up other colony skies, the celebration, the relief, the trust so easily given to strangers who had arrived with nothing but promises and no explanations. And I thought about Edmund Faircliff, standing calmly in front of 4 towering alien delegates, refusing to bend, not out of pride, but out of something far heavier, knowledge. Terrible, careful, guarded knowledge that he had carried alone for years, waiting for the exact moment someone would finally need to hear it. That night, as the twin suns dipped below the frozen ridgeline and the station lights flickered on one by one against the darkening sky, Every senior officer of Larkspur Station gathered in the main briefing hall. Word had spread quickly. By the time I arrived, the room was already full, faces tight with worry, voices low and uncertain. Edmund stood at the front of the room, a single datapad in his weathered hands, waiting until the last person had taken their seat and the room had fallen completely silent. 72 hours ago, he began, we were given a promise, wrapped inside a threat, and most of humanity accepted it without ever asking a single hard question. Tonight, I intend to ask those questions for you. And I warn you now, once you hear the answers, there will be no comfortable way to forget them. He set the datapad down on the table, and the screen behind him flickered to life, revealing an image that made the entire room go still. It was a planet, or what remained of one. Gray, lifeless, its surface scarred in patterns none of us recognized, its orbit littered with the drifting remains of ships that had clearly once belonged to a civilization far more advanced than our own. "This is where my story begins," Edmund said quietly. "And by the time I finish telling it, you will understand exactly why I will never allow this station to disarm. 30 years ago," Edmund continued, "I served aboard a deep survey vessel called the Windrose. We were not soldiers, we were map-makers, sent out past the edge of charted space to record what lay beyond the frontier, nothing more. Back then, nobody believed we would ever meet another civilization in our lifetimes. We were wrong within our first 6 months." He tapped the datapad, and the image behind him shifted, showing a star system none of us recognized, 3 planets circling a dim orange sun. "We found a signal first, old, faint, automated, repeating the same pattern over and over, across a frequency nobody on Earth had ever used before. It took us weeks to translate it. When we finally did, it was not a greeting, it was a warning, broadcast by a species who no longer existed to speak for themselves." The room had gone utterly silent. Even Louisa, standing near the back with her arms crossed, had leaned forward slightly, her earlier frustration replaced by something closer to dread. "The signal came from a people called the Threll," Edmund said. "A peaceful, curious species, not so different from us in temperament, though far older and far more advanced. Their transmission told the story of their final century, and it began, just as ours has begun, with the arrival of representatives from the very same Virini Accord that now sits above our own colony." A murmur passed through the room, quickly silenced. "The Threll were told the same things we have been told, that true peace required the surrender of their weapons, that trust could not exist alongside the tools of conflict. Many of their people welcomed the idea, exhausted from old wars of their own, eager for a future free from fear. Within a generation, they had disarmed completely, trusting entirely in the promises of a council that claimed to protect them." He paused, letting the silence stretch, letting the weight of what was coming settle over the room before he spoke it aloud. Then, one day, ships arrived that did not belong to the Accord at all. A different faction, one the Council had never mentioned, one the Threll had no way to defend themselves against. Within a single season, their cities were emptied, their populations were taken, not destroyed outright, but harvested, redistributed, absorbed into labor systems scattered across a dozen unfamiliar worlds. Their planet was left exactly as you saw a moment ago. Gray, silent, picked clean. I felt my stomach twist into a cold, hard knot. "And the Accord," Harold asked quietly from somewhere near the front, "did nothing to stop it." Edmund's expression darkened. "The Accord did not merely fail to stop it, Harold. The evidence we recovered from that dead system suggests the Accord allowed it, perhaps even arranged for it. A council that survives by keeping peace among its stronger members may find it convenient, even necessary, to occasionally offer up a weaker one as tribute to whatever quiet arrangement keeps that peace intact." Louisa's voice cut through the room, tight and controlled. "You are suggesting the very council that just visited our station is deliberately weakening new civilizations before handing them over to something worse." "I am not suggesting it," Edmund said. I recovered enough of the Threll's final records to know it. Their government resisted the harvesting fleet for exactly 11 days before they were overwhelmed, because 11 days was all the resistance their remaining civilian tools could manage without proper weapons. 11 days, against a species that had once commanded fleets capable of crossing their entire home system in hours. If they had kept even a fraction of their old defenses, that resistance might have lasted long enough for help to arrive from somewhere, anywhere, willing to intervene. "And did help ever arrive?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Edmund looked at me, and for the first time that evening, something like old exhaustion passed behind his calm expression. "No, Grace. Nobody came, because by the time anyone outside that system even learned what had happened, there was nothing left worth saving." Squate. The room sat in heavy silence for a long moment, the weight of his words settling over every person present, like a physical thing. "When we returned home with this information," Edmund continued, "I brought it directly to Earth's highest defense council. I showed them everything, the recovered transmissions, the survey images, the analysis our own scientists conducted for nearly a year afterward. And do you know what they told me? Nobody answered. Nobody needed to. They told me the Threll must have provoked their attackers somehow, that an advanced council such as the Varanai Accord would never allow such an atrocity to occur without cause. They told me my findings were speculative, unverified, dangerous to publicize without further proof. They quietly ended my assignment, reassigned my former crew members to postings scattered so far apart we rarely spoke again, and filed my reports under a classification so restricted that even I eventually lost access to my own research." "Why would they bury something like that?" Harold asked. "Because believing me meant accepting an uncomfortable truth," Edmund said. "It meant admitting that the galaxy we so badly wanted to join might not be the wonderful, welcoming community we hoped for. It meant facing the possibility that trust freely given to strangers, with vastly superior power, is not wisdom. It is simply surrender, dressed up in kinder language. I thought about my grandfather again, about the quiet certainty in his old stories, about safety never being something you could borrow from someone else's hands. So when the Accord arrived here," I said slowly, "with the very same promise, the very same request, you recognized it immediately." "Word for word," Edmund said. "Different translators, different faces, same pattern down to the smallest detail. Surrender your weapons, trust our protection, join our community. It is a beautifully wrapped offer, and I do not doubt that for some smaller, weaker worlds it may occasionally even be sincere. But sincerity offered once does not guarantee sincerity offered forever, and a promise that cannot be verified is nothing more than a hope wearing the mask of a guarantee." Louisa finally spoke again, her voice quieter now, stripped of its earlier command. "If what you are saying is true, Edmund, why hasn't this reached wider attention? Surely other colonies, other survey missions, someone else must have encountered similar evidence by now." "Perhaps they have," Edmund said. "Or perhaps, like me, they were told to be quiet, and unlike me, they listened. I am not asking anyone in this room to simply take my word as absolute truth. I am asking you to consider the cost of being wrong in either direction. If I am mistaken, and the Accord's promises are exactly as generous as they claim, then keeping our defenses intact costs us nothing but a delay in trade benefits and a slower path to full membership. But if I am correct, and we hand over the only tools that might one day let us stand a fighting chance, there will be no 11 days of resistance for Larkspur Station. There will be nothing at all." The room was silent for a long moment, everyone weighing the two futures Edmund had just laid before them. Finally, a woman near the back of the room, Beatrice Hollis, our chief medical officer, spoke up hesitantly. "Even if everything you say is true, Edmund, what exactly can one small mining colony do against an entire alien council? We are not soldiers. We do not have fleets. We barely have enough personnel to keep this station running smoothly, let alone defend it against anyone determined to take it by force." "No," Edmund agreed. "We cannot defeat the Varanai Accord. Not alone, not with the resources we currently possess. But that was never my intention. "Then what is your intention?" Louisa asked. Edmund looked around the room slowly, meeting each of our eyes in turn, before finally answering. "My intention is to refuse quietly, reasonably, and firmly enough that this station is never fully disarmed, while giving the Council no clear excuse to treat our hesitation as open hostility. I do not want a confrontation. I want an argument long enough and stubborn enough that word spreads to other colonies before they finish handing over everything that might one day matter. I want humanity to at least ask the questions I was never allowed to ask 30 years ago, before it is too late for anyone to change course." Harold leaned forward, his voice low. "And if they do not accept a delay, if they decide our hesitation alone counts as non-compliance?" Edmund's expression did not change, though something in his eyes hardened slightly. "Then we will discover exactly how much resolve this station truly has. But I would rather stand here and be wrong about their patience than stand somewhere else, disarmed, and discover I was right about everything else." I looked around the room, watching faces shift from confusion to fear to something else entirely, something I recognized because I felt it building in my own chest as well. Not blind courage, not reckless defiance, something quieter and far more stubborn. The simple, human refusal to hand over the ability to choose our own future, without at least asking why we were being asked to give it up in the first place. Louisa was the last to speak, her voice steady now. The earlier uncertainty finally settled into something resembling resolve. 72 hours, she said. "We use every hour we have left to prepare, to inform the rest of the station honestly, and to decide, together, exactly how far each of us is willing to stand behind Edmund's warning." Nobody argued. Nobody left the room, and somewhere above us, patient and silent, the 3 alien ships continued their quiet watch, entirely unaware that the small, insignificant colony beneath them had just decided it was not quite ready to disappear without a fight. The next 72 hours passed faster than any of us expected, and slower than any of us wanted. Word of Edmund's warning spread through Larkspur Station within a single day, carried from department to department, workshop to workshop, until nearly every soul on the colony had heard some version of the story. Some dismissed it outright, calling it the fearful imagination of a retired officer who had spent too many years alone in his workshop. Others went quiet, thoughtful, weighing his words against the strange, hurried confidence of the delegates who had visited us. But almost nobody demanded we comply immediately, and that alone told me something had shifted in the heart of our small community. Louisa called a full station meeting on the second day, gathering nearly everyone into the main hangar bay, the only space large enough to hold us all. She stood on a raised platform, Edmund beside her, and addressed the crowd directly. "I will not pretend this is a simple decision," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the hangar. "Every government on Earth has instructed us to comply. Every other colony we have contact with has already surrendered its defenses. If we refuse, we may lose access to trade, to medical resources, to whatever benefits this alliance might have offered us. But Commander Faircliff has presented evidence that gives me serious doubt about the true cost of blind compliance. I will not force anyone to stay who wishes to leave before this situation escalates further, but I will also not order this station to disarm without first exhausting every reasonable alternative." A tense murmur rippled through the crowd, but nobody moved toward the exits. Edmund stepped forward next, his voice steady, measured, carrying none of the fear that I suspected lived somewhere beneath his calm exterior. "I am not asking any of you to fight a war today. I am asking you to help me buy time. Time for questions to be asked. Time for other colonies to hear what I have already told you. And if it comes to needing more than time, I am asking you to help me ensure this station is not as easy a target as the Council currently believes it to be." Over the following hours, the station transformed. Harold Nettleton led a team reactivating perimeter defense systems that had technically been scheduled for shutdown, working quickly, quietly, converting old mining equipment into makeshift shielding wherever possible. Beatrice Hollis organized medical stations throughout the colony, preparing for the worst while hoping fervently for the best. I found myself assigned to communications, tasked with encrypting every outward transmission we sent and monitoring every frequency for the first sign of the Council's response. Not everyone agreed with Edmund's plan. A small group, perhaps 30 residents in total, chose to leave the station entirely, boarding one of our supply transports and departing for a nearby settlement that had already fully complied with the Council's demands. Nobody stopped them. Nobody blamed them either. Edmund himself stood at the landing field and shook each of their hands personally before they departed, wishing them safety, meaning every word of it. "Fear is not weakness," he told me quietly as we watched their transport lift off into the pale morning sky. "It would be foolish not to feel it, given what we are about to risk. The only mistake would be letting that fear decide for us without at least understanding what we are afraid of." By the final hour of our 72-hour window, Larkspur Station had transformed from a quiet mining colony into something resembling a fortified settlement, though a painfully modest one compared to the sleek vessels still waiting patiently above us. Our defenses were a patchwork of retrofitted mining lasers, reinforced barriers built from spare hull plating, and communication jamming equipment cobbled together from spare parts by engineers who had never expected to need such things in their lifetimes. The alien shuttle returned exactly when it had promised, descending onto the landing field with the same eerie silence as before. This time, 6 figures walked down the ramp instead of 4, and the delegate who had spoken with us previously stepped forward once more, its expression as calm and unreadable as ever. "Larkspur Station," it said, its translated voice carrying easily across the tense crowd that had gathered to witness the exchange. "Your 72 hours have expired. We are prepared to complete the disarmament process immediately." Louisa stood at the front of the assembled colonists, Edmund beside her, both of them steady despite the enormous weight of the moment. "We have reviewed the terms of your proposal," Louisa said, "and we have concerns regarding the transparency of the agreement, particularly concerning the protections promised to member colonies. We request further clarification before proceeding." The delegate's dark eyes shifted slightly, studying the crowd behind Louisa, the visible defenses now lining the perimeter of the landing field, the reinforced barriers that had not existed during their previous visit. "This is not a negotiation," the delegate said, its tone unchanged, though something in its posture had grown noticeably more rigid. "Compliance was agreed upon by your species' central authority. Your continued resistance constitutes a violation of that agreement." "Our species' central authority did not personally visit this station," Edmund said calmly, stepping forward. "We are the ones being asked to give up our ability to protect ourselves. I believe that gives us the right to ask questions before doing so." The delegate turned its full attention toward him now, and for a brief moment, something flickered behind its calm exterior, something that looked remarkably like recognition. "You are the one who filed the reports," it said. 30 of your years ago, the Threll system." The hangar went utterly silent. Even the wind seemed to pause. Edmund's expression did not change, though I saw his hands tighten slightly at his sides. "You know of my reports. We are aware of many things your species chooses to forget," the delegate said. "Your own authorities dismissed your findings as speculation. Perhaps you should have trusted their judgment over your own." "Perhaps," Edmund said quietly. "You should explain why an advanced council would remember a single dismissed report filed by an insignificant survey officer 30 years ago, unless that report contained something worth remembering." The delegate did not answer immediately, and in that silence, I felt something shift in the crowd around me, a collective understanding passing through every person present. Edmund's suspicion had just been confirmed, not through evidence, but through the simple fact that the council had not denied it. "Your continued resistance," the delegate said finally, its voice losing some of its earlier smoothness, "will be classified as hostile noncompliance. This station will be isolated from all Accord benefits, all trade privileges, and all diplomatic protections effective immediately." "We understand the consequences," Louisa said steadily. "You misunderstand," the delegate replied. "Diplomatic protection is not merely a benefit, Commander. It is currently the only barrier standing between your colony and factions within this sector, who would otherwise take considerably less peaceful interest in an unprotected human settlement. The threat, thinly veiled as a warning, landed heavily across the assembled crowd. I glanced at Edmund, watching his reaction carefully, and saw only calm, unwavering resolve. "Then we will take our chances protecting ourselves," Edmund said, "rather than depend entirely on protections that vanish the moment we ask an uncomfortable question." The delegate studied him for a long, silent moment, and then turned back toward its shuttle without another word. The 6 figures retreated up the ramp in unison, and moments later, the vessel lifted off, climbing back toward the ships in orbit, leaving behind a silence far heavier than before. That silence did not last. Within hours, our sensors detected movement from the vessels above, subtle shifts in their orbital position that Harold's team flagged immediately as concerning. By the following morning, a 4th ship had joined the original 3, larger, darker, its hull design entirely different from anything the Accord delegates had previously shown us. "That is not one of their diplomatic vessels," Harold said grimly, studying the sensor readings alongside Edmund and Louisa in the station's control room. "The design signatures do not match anything in our records of the Accord's fleet." Edmund's expression darkened as he studied the same data. "It matches the wreckage patterns we recovered from the Threll system. Whatever came for them 30 years ago wore a very similar shape." The room fell into tense silence, every person present understanding exactly what this meant. Word of our resistance had not simply angered the council delegates. It had drawn attention from something else entirely, something the Accord's smooth promises had never once mentioned. "We need to warn the other colonies," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "If this is truly happening here, it could be happening everywhere else that refuses to comply." Louisa nodded sharply. "Grace, use every channel we have, encrypted, open, whatever reaches the furthest. I want every settlement within transmission range to know exactly what we have learned, and exactly what we are seeing above our own colony right now." I moved quickly to the communications console, my hands working faster than my mind could fully process, encoding message after message, sending them out across every frequency our equipment could reach. I did not know if anyone would listen. I did not know if it would matter, but I understood, in that moment, exactly what Edmund had been trying to protect from the very beginning. Not simply our weapons, not simply our station, the simple, stubborn right to know the truth before making a choice that could not be undone. Outside, beneath the darkening sky, the 4th ship began its slow, deliberate descent toward our small, defiant colony, and every person on Larkspur Station understood that whatever came next would decide far more than the fate of a single mining outpost on the edge of human space. The 4th ship settled into a low orbit directly above Larkspur Station, close enough that its shadow occasionally passed over the colony as it moved, a dark reminder hanging in our sky that refused to be ignored. For 6 hours, it did nothing but watch, and those 6 hours were among the longest I had ever experienced. I stayed at my station in the communications room, sending message after message outward across every frequency we had access to, repeating Edmund's warning, describing the ships above us, requesting any response from any settlement willing to listen. Most of my messages returned only silence. A handful of smaller colonies acknowledged receipt, their replies cautious, uncertain, clearly unwilling to commit to anything beyond simple confirmation that they had heard us. Then, just past midday, a response arrived that changed everything. It came from Ash Grove Colony, a settlement nearly 2 weeks' travel from Larkspur, one of the first to fully comply with the Council's disarmament demands. The message was brief, hurried, transmitted in a rush that suggested whoever sent it had very little time to spare. "We received your warning 3 days ago," the message read. "We did not believe it. Yesterday, an unidentified vessel entered our system. It does not match Accord markings. Our defenses were already dismantled per the agreement. We have no way to determine its intentions. Please advise." I brought the message immediately to Louisa and Edmund, my hands trembling slightly as I read it aloud. Edmund's expression, usually so carefully composed, flickered with something close to grief. "They disarmed exactly as instructed," he said quietly. "And now they have nothing left to protect themselves with, should that ship prove hostile." "We need to respond," Louisa said, "immediately. Tell them everything we know, everything we have prepared here, anything that might help them buy time." I returned to my console and began drafting a response, my mind racing to compress days of preparation into something a desperate colony could use within hours. As I worked, Harold burst into the room, his expression tight with urgency. "The fourth ship is moving," he said. "It's not staying in orbit anymore." We hurried to the control room together, arriving just as the main view screen displayed the ship's new trajectory, a slow, deliberate descent toward the surface of our colony. "They are not asking permission this time," Louisa observed grimly. Edmund studied the screen for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "Then we do exactly what we prepared for. We do not attack, we do not provoke, we simply refuse to disappear quietly." The ship descended over the following hour, settling onto open ground roughly 2 kilometers from the main colony structure, its massive hull dwarfing anything we had previously encountered. No ramp lowered immediately, no delegation emerged. It simply sat there, silent, its presence alone, a statement more intimidating than any words could have delivered. "Harold," Louisa said, "status on our defenses. Perimeter shielding is active, though it will not hold indefinitely against something of that size," Harold reported. "Our converted mining lasers have enough power for a limited defensive response, but nothing close to matching whatever that vessel is capable of." "Then we do not rely on strength," Edmund said. "We rely on the one thing they clearly did not expect us to have: attention." He turned to me. "Grace, has your transmission reached far enough yet?" "I have sent it to every settlement within range," I confirmed. "Several have already begun sharing it further, relaying our warning to colonies beyond our own transmission reach." "Good," Edmund said. "Because the one thing a hidden pattern cannot survive is being noticed by too many eyes at once." For nearly 2 more hours, the massive vessel remained motionless on the open ground beyond our colony, and the tension within Larkspur Station grew thick enough to feel physically pressing against my chest. Then, finally, its ramp lowered, and a single figure emerged, walking alone across the frozen ground toward our perimeter. It was not one of the smooth, calm delegates we had encountered before. This figure moved differently, its posture sharper, more deliberate, and as it drew closer, I noticed subtle differences in its appearance, a texture to its gray skin that seemed harder, less refined, as though built for purposes far removed from diplomacy. Louisa, Edmund, and a small escort of our security team met the figure at the perimeter, close enough for me to hear the exchange through the comm relay Harold had quietly arranged. "You have caused considerable disruption," the figure said, its translated voice colder, flatter than the delegates before it. "Your transmissions have reached settlements far beyond the scope originally intended for this situation." "That was rather the point," Edmund replied evenly. "You misunderstand the nature of your position," the figure said. "This station's continued existence depends entirely on remaining beneath notice. You have chosen instead to become visible. That choice carries consequences your colony is not equipped to survive." "Perhaps," Edmund said, "or perhaps visibility is exactly what protects us now. A hidden pattern only works while it remains hidden. You have just confirmed, in front of witnesses relaying this exchange to dozens of other settlements, that a faction outside the Accord's official membership takes direct interest in colonies who comply with disarmament. That is no longer a secret confined to one dead system on the far edge of charted space." The figure was silent for a long moment, and I held my breath, watching the exchange through the relay with my heart pounding steadily against my ribs. "Your species is remarkably persistent," it said finally, "for something so small and so recently discovered." "We have had considerable practice surviving difficult circumstances," Edmund said. "It tends to make a species stubborn." Before the figure could respond, a new voice broke into the comm relay, calm, measured, unmistakably one of the original Varanai delegates we had encountered days before. This exchange concludes now. Every head turned toward the sky as a fifth vessel, sleek, silver, unmistakably marked with the same design as the original diplomatic ships, descended rapidly toward the colony. It settled beside the darker vessel, and the original delegate we had first met emerged, moving with visible urgency I had not witnessed in any of our previous encounters. "You were instructed to observe," the delegate said sharply, addressing the harder, sharper figure directly, "not to engage directly with a settlement whose transmissions have already reached observers well beyond acceptable containment." The two figures exchanged words too rapid for our translators to fully capture, their tones tense, clearly displeased with one another, and for the first time since this entire ordeal had begun, I saw genuine uncertainty pass across the delegate's usually composed expression. Finally, the delegate turned back toward Edmund, Louisa, and the rest of us watching from the perimeter. "It appears," the delegate said carefully, "that a miscalculation has occurred regarding this colony's classification." "A miscalculation?" Edmund repeated evenly. "Is that what we are calling it?" The delegate did not answer directly. Larkspur Station's continued resistance to disarmament will be reviewed under revised protocols. Your colony's status remains provisional, pending further evaluation. "And the fourth vessel?" Louisa asked, gesturing toward the harder, sharper ship still resting nearby. "Will depart," the delegate said firmly, glancing briefly toward its counterpart. "Immediately." Within the hour, both vessels lifted away from Larkspur Station, climbing back into the vast darkness above, leaving behind a silence that felt entirely different from the silence that had haunted us for days before. This silence felt, for the first time, like relief. Over the following weeks, the story of Larkspur Station spread quickly across every settlement humanity had established beyond Earth. Some colonies who had already disarmed began quietly petitioning their own governments for clarification regarding the Council's true protections. Others, still undecided, pointed directly to our example as reason to delay their own compliance until further answers could be found. Ashgrove Colony, the settlement that had sent us that desperate message, reported that the unidentified vessel in their own system had unexpectedly changed course and departed without incident, though nobody could say with certainty whether our exposure of the pattern had truly influenced that outcome or whether they had simply been fortunate. Earth's central government, initially furious at our open defiance of official policy, found itself facing a wave of public demand for transparency that grew too large to ignore. Within 2 months, an official inquiry was launched into the full terms of the Varanai Accord's disarmament agreement, and for the first time since the Council's arrival, humanity began asking the very questions Edmund had first raised inside a quiet workshop on the edge of a frozen frontier world. I stood beside Edmund on the observation platform, overlooking Larkspur's landing field, one final evening, watching the twin suns dip below the same ridgeline that had witnessed everything we had endured together. "Do you think it's truly over?" I asked him. He considered the question carefully before answering, the way he always did. "No," he said. "I imagine this is only the very beginning of a much longer conversation, but for the first time in 30 years, it is a conversation humanity is finally willing to have." "Because you refused," I said. "Because we refused," he corrected gently. "One person standing alone rarely changes anything, Grace. It was every person on this station, choosing to stand beside that refusal, once they finally understood what was truly being asked of them, that made the difference." I thought about the ships that had once hung silently above us, patient and certain that we would simply comply like every other colony before us. I thought about the delegate's cold admission, unintentional as it was, confirming everything Edmund had carried alone for 3 long decades. And I thought about the quiet, stubborn courage of an entire community choosing uncertainty and risk over blind, comfortable trust. "What happens now?" I asked. Edmund looked out over the frozen landscape, the lights of our small, defiant colony glowing steadily against the darkening sky. "Now," he said, "we keep asking questions. We keep our right to protect ourselves, and we make certain that the next time someone arrives promising peace, in exchange for our ability to defend our own future, humanity remembers exactly what almost happened to a quiet colony that once refused to disarm. I looked at him, this tired, steady man who had carried a lonely truth for 30 years, waiting patiently for the one moment it would finally matter, and I understood, more clearly than I ever had before, exactly what my grandfather had meant so many years ago. Safety is never something freely given by someone else's hand. It is something earned, guarded, and chosen, again and again, by those brave enough to ask why, even when every voice around them insists there is nothing left to question. They came to disarm us. He would not allow it. And because of that single stubborn refusal, neither would we.